Welcome back, you guys. We're now going to be using CPCTC, so corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, to show that after we show triangles are congruent, which this time we have to think about all of our shortcuts. So we could prove they're congruent by SSS, SAS, angle side angle, ASA, or AAS. So I can prove that these two triangles are congruent by any of those four ways. And after triangles are congruent, any side or angle that I did not show was congruent before has to be congruent, because by definition, if triangles are congruent, all three angles and all three sides are congruent. So I'm going to show you ways to prove the triangles are congruent, and then anything I didn't show originally was congruent to prove my triangles are congruent now have to be congruent by CPCTC. So it'll probably make more sense once we get there. Okay, so let's get going, you guys. So I'm given that XZ is perpendicular to WY. So let's talk about that first. What does it mean for two segments to be perpendicular? Get it, like purr, like a cat. Board slapper. But anyways, what does it mean to be perpendicular? Holy hot dog, you guys are right. When two segments are perpendicular, that means when they intersect, they form 90-degree angles. Okay, so by this statement, I know that these two angles have to be 90 degrees. Now, remember, this does not mean that these two angles are congruent, but what is the measure of a right angle? Well, that means that they each are 90 degrees, which means they have to be congruent because all right angles are congruent. Okay, so one thing I can show is congruent right off the bat is that angle XZW is congruent to angle, so XZW is congruent to XZY. And it's not because it was given to me. So what was given to me was that the two segments were perpendicular, which meant they're right angles. So that's kind of what is given to me. But I know they're congruent because if I have two right angles, they have to be congruent. So all right angles are congruent is kind of my reason for why those are congruent. So there you go. Okay, I'm also given that ZXW, so this bad boy, is congruent to ZXY, so this bad boy. And that's just simply because it was given to me. So angle CXW is congruent to angle ZXY because it was given to me. Sorry, I know this is kind of running in to that statement. Okay, guys, so I'm really close to showing that these two triangles are congruent. I'm super, super close. But in order to use one of my shortcuts, I need a total of 3 things marked congruent, which currently I have 2 angles. So I know that the triangles will be congruent either by angle side angle or by angle angle side, because those are the only ways to show triangles are congruent with 2 angles. Okay, and I have this 4th one here because technically there will be something else we can use to show triangles are congruent in another way. So again, the more ways we can show triangles are congruent, the better, right? Okay, so I now have done everything in the given. So now I need to use one of those tricks up my sleeve to try to mark something else in my picture as congruent. So I don't see any vertical angles. I don't see the X. Okay, I do see, though, a shared side. Do you guys spot the shared side? XZ, whoa, XZ is in this triangle as well as this triangle. So I can now say that X to the Z is congruent to itself. And what is the reason for saying that 2 things are congruent to itself, or if we have a shared side? It would be the reflexive property. Nice job, you guys. So reflexive property. Okay, now, as of right now, I do have enough information to show that my triangles are congruent, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I'm going to say triangle. Now, I'm just going to name this however I feel like. I'm going to name it XZY, or XZW. So triangle XZW is congruent. So again, it's very important how we write our triangle congruency statement. So watch yourself. So I'm going to say triangle XCW. If I go that way, I go from an angle marked congruent to a side marked congruent to an angle or a right angle. So angle, side, right angle. Okay, so I need to go angle, side, right angle on this side. So the way I'd go from an angle to a side to a right angle marked congruent is by going XZY. So triangle XCY. XCY, Miss Long, not W. What's wrong with you? Sorry, guys. Ooh, XCY. So now I know my two triangles are congruent by which postulate? Well, let's see here. I have an angle. The next thing is a side and an angle. So these are congruent by angle, side, angle. So this one's marked with ASA, as well as this one. Angle, then a side, then an angle. So ASA. So the two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. But, hold your horses. There's something else I can mark in my picture that would show the triangles are congruent. So, do you guys spot another trick up your sleeve that you can use to show that angles are congruent? Well, if I know two of my angles are congruent, what can I use to show that the third angle or the final angle is congruent? That's correct, you guys. I can say angle W is congruent to angle Y because of third angle theorem. Third angle theorem. Guys, so since I know two angles are congruent, the final angles are congruent by the third angle theorem. Bam. Okay, so I also know my triangles are now congruent. Well, it doesn't really matter which outermost item you start with, but I could start here. I have an angle, then the next thing I see is an angle, then a side. So angle, angle, side. Also this way, angle, angle, side. Or I could go the other way. I could say angle, angle, side. Angle, angle, side. So they are also marked congruent with the angle, angle, side marking. So angle, angle, side. So they're also congruent and angle, angle, side, which is pretty cool, right? The more ways you can show something is congruent, the better. Okay, so I now know that these two triangles are congruent. I have shown that three of the angles and one of the sides is congruent to prove the triangles are congruent. So now that I know my two triangles are congruent, every other side and angle that I did not mark congruent in my picture now has to be congruent. Because if these two triangles are congruent, the remaining sides and angles that correspond to each other have to be congruent. Guys, so now I can say that WZ is congruent to ZY because my triangles are congruent. So all three sides and all three angles are congruent. So my reason is now because of CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so that tells me that any other part is congruent by CPCTC. Technically, I could also say that WX and XY, even though I don't have them marked in my picture as congruent, now that I know my triangles are congruent, these two sides would also have to be congruent. And again, the reason would be CPCTC. So that is how we can show that WZ and ZY are congruent. Whoa, wasn't that cool, you guys? Well, if you think you kind of understand how we're doing things, example 18 is very similar. So I encourage you to try example 18 on your own and fast forward to the end and see if you got it right. Otherwise, you can follow along with me and it'll be a swell time. All right, let's get going, you guys.